And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics here on this wonderful Wednesday afternoon here in southern Oklahoma. You couldn't find a more beautiful afternoon. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. So, anyway, great to be back with you. My name is Don Preston. Over here is Mike Sullivan. Mike, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Sorry, guys, we started a little late, but we had some
Yeah.
technical difficulties. My audio wasn't working for some reason, and we finally got it fixed somehow. I guess we
It,
got lucky.
neither one of us know what happened.
Yeah, neither one of us know what we're doing in technology, but
Exactly right. Exactly.
we made it.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to continue our study. And we last week we hit a few licks on Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11. I think I made the comment last week, Mike, that Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11 is generally viewed in the partial preterist world and the futurist world as the go-to text. It's like, well, okay, preterists, we'll grant you this, we grant you that, but I'm telling you, you can't get around Acts 1, 9 through 11.
It's an
And
island. It's an island to itself.
it is. It's an island to itself. And, you have men like Sariah, Jonathan Sariah, who, of course, takes Acts 1, 9 to 11 as future, but he surrenders so many New Testament texts to AD 70, and he realizes what he's done.
Mhm.
Keith Matheson's the same way.
Oh, every text in the Gospels, any reference to the coming of the Son of Man, they're
Yeah,
all AD 70.
that's AD 70.
Only Paul came up with the
Yeah,
doctrine of the second coming
yeah.
in Acts 1:11. That's it.
And so both of these men come to the conclusion that the New Testament says very precious little about an end of human history coming of the Lord. They realize that they have no hermeneutic to justify that. Now, they appeal to Acts 1, 9 through 11, but they don't really do any solid exegesis on it.
There's no analogy of faith when they do.
No.
I mean, their only analogy of faith is to go to 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 that they assume is the same thing and separate all three of those from the book of Revelation, from the Olivet Discourse, from the Gospels completely.
Yeah. And it's like Paul just, they look at first, this is interesting. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10, that they had forsaken their idols to serve the true and the living God, the one who had delivered them from the wrath that was coming. They never talk about John the Baptizer, who foretold the wrath that was about to come.
Yeah.
They never conflate those two passages.
Well, Matheson is the only partial preterist I have seen that surrenders Second Thessalonians 1, 5 through 10. But
he will
appeal to the wrath of John the Baptist, and he will appeal to the wrath against this people.
Did I say 2 Thessalonians?
Yeah, 2 Thessalonians.
I'm sorry, I was referring to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10.
Okay.
Yeah, they're of the one who is coming.
Oh, I got you. Rescue. Yeah, I got you.
To rescue them from the coming wrath and from the one who is coming. And even men like F.F. Bruce recognized this is a direct correlation with Romans chapter 11, the coming of Zion, or the coming of the Lord out of Zion, and recognizes some of the difficulties of the text. And then you have men in the partial preterist camp who go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 13, because we know that the Lord is coming with all of his saints, which is taken directly out of Zechariah chapter 14, verse 5. Behold, the Lord comes with all of his saints. And one partial preterist after another understands Zechariah 14 is AD 70. And so they acknowledge that so many of these texts, even in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, refer to first century events, AD 70. But lo and behold, they come to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and Paul pulls this passage completely out of the air.
Right. Well, this is what Matheson says of 1 Thessalonians.
Okay, sorry.
1:10. Okay, he says this. He says, the wrath to come that Paul mentions is a reference to divine judgment. There's some indication in the first epistle that the wrath spoken of here refers to first century judgment. Then he goes to chapter 2, verse 16. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
But then he gets out of it. But in light of Paul's already and not yet, eschatology, even such contemporary manifestations of wrath must not be understood to rule out the final full manifestation of God's wrath. And no verse, just a philosophy, an assumption that there's an already and not yet that spans thousands and thousands of years. We know when the Bible tells us the not yet is.
Yeah.
And it's 80-70.
Yeah. And of course, that gets into the nonsense of those who say there are no statements of imminence concerning the eschaton in the New Testament, because the time is always present. The Lord is always near. The judgment is always near. It's always at hand, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And that cannot be sustained on any honest contextual examination of time statements, either in the Old Testament or in the New. And I suspect that our opponents in the debate that we'll have in January may be listening tonight, and that's fine.
Yeah, it is. Because I'm going to do what I did in my article, and Sam's going to do what he did in his article, and my article blew out his.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a comparison on the time statements in the Old Testament, it has to be a real comparison. I went to passages that dealt with the coming of the day of the Lord, coming on the clouds, decreation. He's coming near. It will not delay. And I got about 12 of them in the Old Testament. And every time he uses near, when God is coming, when Yahweh's coming on the clouds in judgment, and it will not be delayed, it's between the latest is 40 years.
Yeah.
That's what near and already or will not delay means in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So you have a perfect correlation between the imminent time statements within the lifetime of the prophet and his contemporaries, decreation, governments, civil and religious rulers, and you have apocalyptic language, and it's perfect in full preterism. We let Scripture interpret itself, and Sam can't go to those texts. He hasn't gone to those texts.
He used to.
He's going to try to refute what we've established there. He's just going to assume this is, I don't know what he's going to do. Assume that it's the end of world history, I guess.
Well, of course, the beauty of it is we have quotes directly from Sam Frost. I don't know about Jeremiah. We don't know what he believes. Right. Except the day before the challenge was accepted, he did know what he believed. Right. But I have it on record of Sam Frost commenting on Ezekiel chapter 7. The day of the Lord is at hand. The day of the Lord is near. Uh-huh. The day of the Lord is very near. 7 times in Ezekiel 7, right. The day of the Lord is at hand. It is drawn near. And Sam Frost says, well, that was to happen imminently.
Even now as an amillennialist, that's what he said?
No, I'm saying that's what he said then. So the question is then raised, what's the hermeneutic for rejecting what you said then, especially in light, and I won't take the time to develop it because we've got some things we want to say on Acts 1 tonight. But when we have the book of Ezekiel is one of the greatest demonstrations of the fallacy of saying time doesn't mean anything to God, and he doesn't communicate truthfully about time.
Some people tried to pull that off and it didn't go too well.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway,
I mean, if you want to align yourself with the false prophets who are saying that near and will not delay meant not in our lifetime, but
not in our lifetime,
in our children's lifetime.
Yeah. Hey, you go right ahead and do that.
Exactly. So, guys, tonight what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the Old Testament background or the fulfillment of Acts 1:9 and Acts 1:9-11. The ascension and this coming. And if we can look at those Old Testament passages and also some of the parables that Jesus discusses during this transition period, we may get a fuller story on Acts 1:9-11.
Yeah.
So, the two being, I think, Psalm 110 and, of course, Daniel 7:13. Mm. And in Matthew 26:64, Jesus conflates Psalm 110 with Daniel 7:13. And he says, Jesus said to him, You have said so, but I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. Now that's Psalm 110.
Yep.
Okay, where he's seated until something happens. All right. And then the latter part of the verse, number 2, and coming on the clouds of heaven, that's a reference to Daniel 7:13. So, I guess it kind of comes back to Daniel. Well, it comes back to Daniel 7, and it comes back to Psalm 110 and how the futurists want to interpret that. But
yeah, let's take a look at Psalms 110. Just as we were struggling there to get our audio up, my mind was going through Psalms 110, and I didn't have my Bible.
I've got it up here if you want to
Oh,
look.
okay. Yeah. Okay. Folks, look, Psalms 110. And by the way, Sam Frost thinks that Psalms 110 is absolutely definitive proof of a yet future coming. He sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. He hasn't made his enemies his footstool yet. Therefore, Psalms 110 is not yet fulfilled. Well, that opens up all sorts of cans, a can of all sorts of worms. I mean, that's just a deadly argument for Sam Frost to make. But nonetheless, this is the Psalm of David. Yahweh the Father vows to my Lord. The Lord said to my Lord, is what it is saying. Sit at my right hand, that's Acts 1:9, until I make your enemies your footstool for your feet. Acts 1:11. Yahweh will send forth your mighty scepter from Zion. Rule amidst your enemies. With you is dominion on the day of your strength, amidst the shining lights of the holy ones. I have begotten you from the womb before the morning star. Yahweh has sworn and will not relent or disavow. You are a Kohen, a priest forever, according to my decree. A priest after the order of Melchizedek. And then I was hoping you'd have the
Yeah, I didn't
verse
have the
5. Yeah, that's okay. Let me read it here very, very quickly because it's what I wanted to get to, because it's what so many commentators ignore.
Yeah.
So Psalms 110, verse 5. The Lord is at your right hand. He shall execute kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge among the nations. And I can't hardly see tonight. He will fill the places with dead bodies. He shall execute the heads of many countries. He shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he shall lift up the head. Now, folks, I don't know very many commentaries that really want to apply those verses to an end of human history. But we do know that in the war of 66 to 70, the valleys were full of dead bodies. We do know that the rulers of Israel were slain. And we do know that was the Lord coming in his wrath. As a matter of fact, this whole concept of the Lord's day of vengeance and the Lord's day of wrath, we were talking about the Old Testament and how the Old Testament uses time language. Well, the same is true of the language of the day of the Lord's wrath or the day of the Lord's vengeance. And in one of my newer books, these are the days in which all things must be fulfilled. I document the use of that terminology, the day of the Lord's wrath and the day of the Lord's vengeance. It is invariably a reference to when Yahweh would use one nation to judge another nation. I mean, you have Isaiah chapter 34. This incredible passage that is full of decreation language. The constellations of the heavens shall melt, the mountains shall melt, the stars shall fall from the sky, the dust of the earth shall be turned into fire, the streams shall be turned into pitch and shall burn day and night forever and forever. This is the day of the Lord's wrath. It is the day of the Lord's vengeance against his enemies. Well, verse 5 and following tells us this is the day of the Lord against Bozrah, the capital of Edom. And interestingly enough, and significantly enough, The book of Obadiah is a prediction of the destruction of Edom, which, by the way, Edom is where this city called Petra. I don't know if you've ever done any study on that or not. Petra was an absolutely astounding, still is to this day, archaeological discovery. And the Bedouins, the Bedouins of the Idumean area, they knew about it, but they never told anybody about it. It wasn't until the 19th century that a guy disguised himself as an Arab, and some Arabs took him back there. And you wind back through these narrow passages through the rocks and the cliffs, and you come in, folks, if you've never studied and researched the story of Petra, this Idumean capital, do yourself a favor. I mean, it is one of the most amazing stories. Well, when Isaiah 34 and when Obadiah was written, pardon me, Edom had never been conquered. They were considered virtually impregnable because of the way, in fact, Obadiah chapter 1, it was a condemnation of the one who exalts herself to the stars and into the heavens, who says that she can never be brought down. Well, she had never been brought down before. Right. And so the Lord just tells them, again, Obadiah verses 1 through 3, I'm going to bring you down from the stars. I'm going to bring you down from the heavens. This was an astounding prophecy. And Obadiah verse 15 says, the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations.
Yes. Real quick, where does it say Edom here in Psalm 110?
Psalms 110 doesn't. I'm using the language.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And the thought of the war and what have you. And of course, as you and I have developed before, the New Testament identifies the enemies of Christ.
Yes.
Philippians chapter 3, Paul speaking of the Judaizers and the Jews persecuting the church. And he says, I tell you now, even weeping, they are the enemies of Christ. You know, Luke 19, which I doubt that we get to tonight, but Luke chapter 19, when the master went away into far country there to receive a kingdom, a group of men sent an embassage after him to say, we would not have this man to rule over us. Well, he received the kingdom. When he came back, again, Luke chapter 19, that king said, bring those men before me, those enemies before me, and destroy them. Well, who were the enemies who said, we will not have Jesus to rule over us?
Exactly.
I mean, all you got to do is do this word study of the enemies of Christ throughout the New Testament. And it's real clear who his enemies were. And it wasn't just the physical enemies. It was what the old covenant stood for. It was administration of death. It could not give righteousness. It could not give life. All of those things were antithetical to Christ and the new covenant and that which he gives us. And that's salvation.
Now in Psalm 110, it says that he'll judge the nations. And of course, in Matthew 25, 31 through 46, he's going to judge the nations.
Exactly.
Of course, James Stewart Russell, and he points this out, and he's correct, okay, that the cities in Israel were known as their own individual nations with kings. So in a real sense, when the Idumeans came, and attacked their own country pretty much, he judged the kings and the nations within Israel itself. But going back to Matthew 10 through 12, Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven is at hand. There's a day of judgment that's going to come. And that's when he cites Daniel 7:13. Right. When the son of, you're not going to finish going through you're not going to exhaust the cities of Israel as a place of refuge.
Right.
Before the Son of Man comes, he who endures till the end shall be saved. Well, the end of what? Daniel 7, in the Old Covenant age, during the time of the Roman Empire. What coming is this? Oh, the coming of the Son of Man in Daniel 7:13. So the day of judgment there is clearly linked to Christ coming in AD 70. And he talks about in chapter 10, 11, and 12, maybe 13 too, that the day of judgment will involve not just Israel, but Sidon, Tyre, Sodom and Gomorrah. And then you get into Matthew 25, and it's the nation. So yeah, Russell has a good point, but
it's not definitive. It's not the final answer.
The Gentile nations and their kings that had died and went to Hades, those nations and kings were judged in AD 70. And we've talked about this before as well, that the gospel went throughout the Roman Empire, and there was at least 10 nations that composed the Roman Empire that they had conquered. And that, when the day of the Lord took place, there was a spiritual judgment upon the nations, because if they did not trust Christ and the new covenant as the means of forgiveness, they were doomed, because those 70 bulls that were sacrificed for those nations were no more.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the Jews well understood that was the purpose of those 70 bull sacrifices on Sukkot, during Sukkot, and that without those sacrifices, the nations were doomed.
Yeah,
they believe that very firmly. I established that in my book on Resurrection Feast Fulfilled. And so, by the way, I want to confirm there and drive home a point that you were talking about, these pagan nations. In Matthew chapter 12, 39 and following, the Pharisees approached Jesus and said, "Give us a sign." And Jesus said, and by the way, I'll be posting an article on this on my website either tomorrow or maybe Friday. I don't know. I've got a few little touches to make to it. But anyway, Jesus said, "No sign shall be given except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, even so the Son of Man shall be in the belly of the earth 3 days and 3 nights." And then he added something. The men of Nineveh. Well, here's a pagan city, a pagan empire. The men of Nineveh shall rise up in the judgment. That's the Greek, in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. So what do you have? You have the Ninevites. You have the pagans rising up at the same time as Israel. And I never will forget, I was in one conversation with a futurist, and I was trying to point out the contemporary nature of that judgment. He said, no, you're abusing that text. I said, how am I abusing it? He said, Jesus did not say the men of Nineveh will rise up in this generation with Israel. It just simply says they shall rise up in the judgment and condemn this generation. I said, well, okay, but the question is, was Israel judged in that generation? And the face just kind of goes blank, and yeah. I said, okay.
And don't partial preterists admit that there?
Partial preterists, as a general rule, admit, absolutely, Israel was judged in that generation. Now, how they can avoid that, I don't know, because of Matthew 23, 29 through 37. I mean, I just don't see how anyone could deny that. But who knows? I mean, we hear brand new arguments all the time that you can't find anywhere else,
Well,
So-
in Daniel 2 is parallel to Daniel 7. So you have the four parts of the statue, you have the four beasts, you have the stone cut without hands comes and crushes and judges the four kingdoms. And then in 7, instead of the stone, you have the coming of the Son of Man, and he comes and he judges those nations.
Yep. Well, of course, then again, you have Sam Frost, who denies that Daniel chapter 2 is messianic. And he admits,
oh, this is going to be fun.
he admits that Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14 is messianic, but he doesn't take, for instance, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 as in the days of the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
He doesn't.
His epiphanies, he thinks.
Yeah, he doesn't even admit that the fourth kingdom is the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
What he says is that Daniel 7, 13 and 14, now this is the last that I had him on record. Who knows? He may have changed. But the point of fact is, he says that Daniel 7, 13 and 14 are a parenthetical insertion into Daniel chapter 7.
What does he mean by parenthetical insertion? Insertion by who?
Yeah, well, all of a sudden, here is God talking about the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemies, and talking about the little horn of Antiochus Epiphanes jumping up and persecuting Israel. And then,
Out of the blue,
with no contextual indication whatsoever, you got to have it. You got to be inspired to know that Daniel 7, 13 and 14 didn't apply. But instead it is messianic. But
well,
that completely breaks the flow of the text. And not only that, it completely ignores the interpretation of the vision.
yeah, and how the New Testament applies it. Well, let's look at that while we're talking about it. Daniel 7, 13, 14. Don and I are going to be reading from the Old Greek Septuagint, one of the variants of the Old Greek Septuagint.
May I go back and clarify something?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
In your chart here, you have the day of his wrath coming in verse 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The point that I was making a while ago is that in all of these Old Testament passages,
of the day of his wrath.
What we have the day of the Lord's wrath, the day of the Lord's vengeance, and they invariably referred to a historical judgment by Yahweh. And I was giving Isaiah 34 and Edom, and I got sidetracked on Bozrah there and Petra and what have you. But here's the fascinating thing. This day of the Lord's vengeance of Isaiah 34 was to be against Bozrah, i.e. Edom. In 583 BC, and even the Smith's Bible Dictionary confirms this, McClintock and Strong confirms this. Let's see, who was it? Brown's Dictionary of Theology of the New Testament. Is that right? Anyway.
Colin Brown? You talking about?
Colin Brown. That's who I was trying to think of. He confirms it. 583 BC, for the very first time in the Edomian history, a foreign nation, a foreign army conquered them. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed them in 583 BC. And you can jump forward to the book of Malachi, written approximately, I'm going to round it off to 450 BC. And the Lord has 7 controversies with Judah and Jerusalem. And the Lord says, I have loved you. And you say, wherein have you loved us? And the Lord says, I have hated Esau. I have loved you, and I've hated Esau. Well, wherein have you loved us? And he says, I destroyed Edom. I made her as a desolation and as a habitation for the jackals, which, by the way, is taken directly from Isaiah 34.
Right.
So here you have the day of the Lord's vengeance, the day of the Lord's wrath defined for us.
And Don, we have, is it Ezekiel or Isaiah where he, I think he's judging Egypt, but he also judges the surrounding nations.
Oh, yeah.
So
Jeremiah,
we have him coming in wrath, a day of the Lord, a judgment in time, in history, when he's judging, and it says all the nations.
Yeah.
But in context, we know what the all nations are. But again, there's a reference to God judging all the nations.
That takes us right back to Obadiah, verse 15. The day of the Lord is near on all the nations. Well, Jeremiah 25 and Ezekiel chapter 25 have Nebuchadnezzar, who has the Lord's sword in his hand, by the way, and he is the Lord's sword. In Ezekiel 30 through 32, Nebuchadnezzar is the one that judges all 25 of those nations. By the way, Edom is mentioned in each one of the lists of the 25 nations.
And Nebuchadnezzar is God's rod and sword to judge those nations.
Exactly. There's just simply no way out of this. And again, this is the day of the Lord's wrath. It's the day of the Lord's vengeance, which goes right back to Psalms 110 and the destruction of the kings in the day of his wrath, which is what he's talking about. I mean, it doesn't have to use the term the day of the Lord's vengeance for it to be all about that.
Yeah, I think we'll get there, but Revelation 11, 15 through 18 talks
Your
about
wrath
that.
has come.
So here we are, Daniel 7:13. I was watching in the visions of the night, and behold, upon the clouds of heaven he came like a son of man, and as or like the Ancient of Days, he was present. And I'll come back to that in a second. Let me skip this. And those who stood by were present with him. And there was given to him authority and honor and a kingdom, and all the nations, tribes, and tongues shall serve him. His authority is an everlasting authority which shall not pass away, and his kingdom shall not be destroyed. And of course, you go to Revelation 11, 15 through 18. It's the appointed time for the judgment of the dead to take place, and his wrath. It clearly says his wrath. So getting back to Psalm 110:5 as well, his wrath is manifested, the day of his wrath. And so it says that his kingdom is forever, just like Daniel 7:14 says. And it's at his coming in AD 70 when his kingdom comes, when the judgment of the dead takes place, which is also Daniel 7, verses 9 through 12. So, and also this Daniel 2 through 7 is written in Aramaic.
Yeah.
But the Aramaic word here for present also translates into presence. And the Greek, the Septuagint here, is the root. I'm not a Greek scholar. I'm not going to pretend to. But the root of it goes to parousia in the New Testament. So that's beautiful because in the New Testament, Jesus, Paul, and John all apply Daniel 7:13 to the second coming, the imminent second coming of Christ in AD 70, not his ascension. And they link it to his parousia. So that's another link back to Daniel 7:13. And Paul says that he comes in his parousia with his saints and with his angels, with the dead that he raises. And so he's coming with his people representatively to judge Israel and the nations. And
that's right. Let me read a quote. This is really, really good. This is a quote from Andreas Stutz in the book. Let me see. Let me go ahead and draw it up so that I don't botch the quote. Andreas Stutz in the book, A Handbook on the Jewish Roots of the Christian Faith, is edited by Craig Evans and David Mishkin, published 2019, page 158. And I give this citation. This is not from a preterist. This is not someone that's, biased toward the preterist view. Pardon me. But he says, Jesus adapted the term, that is, the term Son of Man, in a very balanced way. 16 times it relates to his earthly life, 27 times referring to his suffering, 26 times to his glorifications. Now watch this. While Jesus applied the term Son of Man from Daniel 7:13 to 14 to the various states of his ministry, he applied the vision reported in Daniel 7:13 to 14, along with Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 10, which is obvious, exclusively and unambiguously to his return. Matthew 24:30, Matthew 26:64, Luke 21:26 and 27. This observation confirms that Jesus understood himself as the Danielic Son of Man. And that's unquote. And then Stutz goes ahead to note how the language of coming on the clouds demands that Jesus saw himself as deity, because only deity rode on the clouds.
Now, because I'm reading your manuscript on the millennium, and I think I read that, but there's another quote you have there that dovetails with what Kyle and Dalish see here in Daniel 7:13, and they say the nations are rising up. The little horn is rising up in defiance, and yes, as they're rising up, the language is that the Son of Man is coming down.
Yeah.
to judge them. And then you had an interesting quote from someone, I can't remember who it was, is that the picture is Christ is coming down with his saints and he's judging with their thrones on earth.
That quote is from Elton Holland, who, by the way, Sam Frost likes to quote. He considers him a, quote, friend and brother, unquote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I consider Elton Holland a friend as well. But Elton Holland cites Manson, Robinson, et cetera, and he can cite Wright and others, if you wish, who all say that Daniel 7:13 and 14 is Christ ascending to the heavenly courtroom, being presented before God. Okay, Elton Holland says there are significant problems with this view.
Yeah.
The first problem is the assumption that the Son of Man ascends to the Ancient One simply because the passage mentions a throne room. In fact, the direction of travel is not specified in the text. Hence,
Don.
Yeah.
Start over. I'm sorry. We had a glitch where we just froze there for 30 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So go ahead and quote that again.
Okay, I'm reading from Elton Holland in an article that he wrote, and he's taking note of how scholars, and he quotes several scholars who say that Daniel 7:13 and 14 is Christ ascending to the Father. But he says, quote, there are several significant problems with this view. The first problem is the assumption that the Son of Man ascends to the Ancient One simply because the passage mentions a throne room. In fact, the direction of travel is not specified in the text. Hence, the deduction is invalid because now watch this, what he says, ladies and gentlemen. The deduction is invalid because there are a number of Old Testament texts also depicting God's throne room of judgment on the earth.
I found that fascinating. I want to go through all those. That's interesting.
Yeah, Jeremiah 49:38, Joel 3, which would be Joel 4 in the other passages. Joel 4, 1 and 2 and verse 12, Zechariah 14, 1 through 5, Psalms 50, Psalms 96, 10 to 13. And then he cites first Enoch 25 and 3. And Enoch is a fascinating book. It's really a paradox. But nonetheless, he says, and he gives Daniel 7, 9, and he says, I will set my throne in Jeremiah 49:38. As I watched, the thrones were set in place. Elam and destroyed their king, and the Ancient One took his throne. And it speaks of officials, says the Lord. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. Rowley identifies an antitypical parallel between the beast rising out of the sea and the descent of the Son of Man, contrasting their origin. And he quotes other sources who point out that the grammar of the passage between Daniel 7, 8, and 9 supports the setting of this throne room being on earth.
Wow.
So, while Sam Frost likes to talk about Elton Holland being his friend and brother and saying, well, he agrees with me, he categorically disagrees with him on Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And I'll just throw this out there. Elton and I have been corresponding over the last couple of days. He just sent me a manuscript, or rather an article to read, and I'm getting ready to send him an article to read as well. He and I correspond on a very regular, I say very regular, just a pretty solidly regular basis. I consider him a friend. He's a super, super nice guy. He's certainly not a preterist, but he certainly does not agree with Sam Frost like Sam Frost wants to give the impression. Now, does Elton Holland believe like me as a full preterist? Nope. I would never claim that.
Right.
But he certainly agrees with me on many key points.
Yeah. So if you're going to take that position, Daniel 7 is really clear that this takes place during the time of the fourth kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
So Sam is going to, I don't know how like you said, it's pure eisegesis. He cuts it and puts it. That's just bizarre.
To say, as he does, as he has, that Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is a parenthetical insertion would seem to demand by logic, by grammar, by hermeneutic, by basically every common sense rule you can think of, that there ought to be some indication that the Holy Spirit is saying, okay, time out, guys. Let me throw this in here. And it's a prophecy of something that won't happen for over 200 years now. But let me throw the prophecy in there. Okay, verse 15. Now let me interpret the vision that came before that parenthetical insertion.
Right.
I'm sorry. What's that non-Latin term that some dude invented? Argumentum ad desperatum.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I think that quote by Andrea Stutz, and I think Elton Holland's observations are absolutely spot on.
Yeah, and Kylan Delitzsch.
And Kylan Delitzsch and other scholars as well. Now, is there a very significant number of scholars, N.T. Wright among them, R.T. France among them, who differ with that view, and they believe that it is, in fact, speaking of Christ ascending? I don't doubt that even a little bit.
But that was not the early view of the church, and the overwhelming early view of the church was not the ascension. It was the second coming.
Yeah, Greg.
I think it's not until the 300s or 400s that the ascension view even starts taking off.
Yeah, Greg Keener points out. Now, Sam Frost challenged this. I don't have the direct citation that he gave, and I wish I did. But Sam Frost challenged it. But Greg Keener says that in the earliest writings of the church, what we would call the apostolic fathers and the patristic writers, none of them appealed to Acts chapter 1 as the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7. Well, like I said, Sam challenged that, and I don't remember if I wrote the verse down that he gave me. But even if he was able to produce one, maybe two verses from patristic writers, that doesn't mean that the great majority of them agreed with that.
You're talking about Acts 1:11 and
yes,
Daniel
being the fulfillment of Daniel. Yeah, Keener says that's not how Acts 1 was interpreted in the early church.
Nice.
Yeah, and I've got that quote. Let me see. I can draw that up real quick. Go right ahead.
Well, Don's already mentioned one of the parables, and of course we've got the parable of the tenants, and we got the parable of the talents, and then I love Hebrews chapter 10 because Hebrews 10 quotes Psalm 110 in verse 12. And then in verse 25, he says that the day is drawing near. Well, what day is drawing near? Oh, for a fury of fire that is about to consume, Greek word mellow, the enemy. Okay, well, what's the antecedent, the nearest antecedent to the enemies? Oh, verse 12. The enemies that Christ was going to come and judge in this about to fiery judgment. And then it's beautiful. It's just a natural flow. And this takes place when Christ comes in vengeance to repay, quoting Deuteronomy 32 that we've talked about quite a bit. And he tells you when this is going to take place in a very, very little while, and Christ will not delay. So he's going to judge the enemies of Psalm 110 in AD 70. There's no way around that. And that's very consistent with what you have seen in some of these parables, Don.
The parables to me, and it's what I call the absent master parables. But let me give you this quote from Keener.
Okay.
In his book on Acts, and as you know, he wrote a 2-volume work on Acts, and both of those books are humongous books. But he says, quote,
Isn't he a charismatic? Is he a charismatic? I think so.
Boy, that's a good question. I think he is, but I
think I met him one time at an ETS.
Okay. Anyway, he says, quote, early Christians also found in Jesus's ascension fulfillment of Psalms 110. This is explicit, he says, in Luke 20, verse 42, Mark 12, 36, Matthew 22:44, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 13. Exemplified also in this context of Acts 2:33 to 34. And he says, compare Acts 7:55 and 56. They also cite the authority of Jesus for the use of this text, Mark 12:36, Mark 14:62. And in Luke's story, Jesus is the source for the early Christians' biblical theology surrounding his exaltation, Luke 20:42. And then he says on page 645, page 720, footnote 645, he says, most New Testament writers who refer to the ascension do so only by way of Psalms 110, verse 1.
Exactly.
That's, once again, this guy's not a preterist, not about to become a preterist.
Right.
But he is considered one of the foremost New Testament scholars in the world today. And he says, here's how the New Testament writers viewed Psalms 110. It's the ascension.
Exactly.
And
what does he say about Daniel 7:13?
That is the ascension.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No. Let me see.
I think what you said, he said, was that
it's his glorification, exaltation. If I'm reading this correctly. Okay. Found in Jesus' ascension, fulfillment of Psalms 110, not Daniel. Yeah. Let me see if I've got a reference to Keener on Daniel 7. I don't think I do, come to think of it.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, I'll have to directly look that up. I do have it listed here in the same spot, but he doesn't actually mention Daniel 7 in this quote. I've got to look that up.
I think he does take it as the ascension.
He may do that, but he's saying, okay, so what he's saying is that most New Testament writers who refer to the ascension do so only by way of Psalms 110. So he says Psalms 110 is the paradigmatic passage for the New Testament writers referring to the ascension. Now, which raises a really interesting question. Does he conflate Psalms 110 with Daniel 7?
Well, yeah, I
got to go back and look at him a little closer.
Which I think that's what Sam would do, which is, I think that's a mistake, because he's talking about his ascension and his coming. He's conflating different things. And so these parables, whether it's the father who goes on a journey and then he sends servants, and then last of all, he sends his son, and they kill him, and they ask the Pharisees, well, what should we do in this situation? They said, well, you got to kill those miserable people and rent out the vineyard to another group. And he says, exactly. I'm going to take the kingdom from you and I'm going to give it to another nation, and I'm going to destroy you.
It's like I said, and I actually set out, it's been 3 years ago now, maybe 4. I was going to write a book on Luke chapter 19, 11 and following, this parable of the absent master, because the force of all of these parables of the absent master. And to be honest with you, it was Acts 1 that started me on that study.
Right.
Because I'm sitting there looking, and I'm sitting there studying. I'm going, wait a minute. This is Jesus, the master, departing and giving tasks to his servants. Boy, that sounds familiar. I think I've read about this somewhere. And so I began that journey of examining each one of the absent master parables. And I found such a strange admixture of interpretations of the different absent master parables, Mike. This is so common in the parables. You have commentators that are just absolutely, positively sure. Luke chapter 19, we'll say more about it specifically here in a moment, but who are absolutely positive. Luke chapter 19 is talking about the judgment of Israel in AD 70. You have commentators who, guess what? They go to Matthew 21, the parable that you just mentioned there of the wicked husbandman. Well, there was a certain man who had a vineyard. He let it out to workers and he departed. This is the absent master. Okay, and as you pointed out so well, okay, the time of the harvest came. He sent his servants to gather the harvest. The workers beat them, mistreated them. He sent some more. Same thing happened. He sent his son. They killed the son. So he poses the question, what will the master of that vineyard do? I absolutely love this. When he comes. And he uses the Greek word elthi, which is a cognate of erkomai. Erkomai is the verb that results in the parousia. Parousia is the noun. But elthi is a very, very common cognate of erkomai. The Jews understood what Jesus meant by Jesus's reference to the master of the vineyard coming. They understood that the master is going to send out an army and he's going to kill them.
Burn their city. Yeah.
And burn their city in the parable, in the very next parable. So you have this absent master parable of Matthew 21. And I want to tell you, this is a parable on which the majority of the commentators that I looked at, I got a couple of books on the parables over there that are just, excuse my bluntness, they are homiletic nonsense. They make no attempt whatsoever to interpret the parables of Jesus in the cultural, social, religious context in which he gave those parables. None.
Don, I'm sorry. I just saw something real quick. Hold that thought.
Sure.
But this reminds me, they suppose that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. He said then, therefore, a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom. That kind of, what's Acts 1:6 about?
That's the whole point.
Right? I mean, is this not? I mean, Acts 1:6 through 11. I mean, they're asking Jesus, is it at this time that you're gonna establish the kingdom? And he's like, yeah, no.
This is the very thing. These are the very connections that, like I said, I was looking at Acts chapter 1. I was reading about Jesus speaking to his apostles, telling them to go into all the world. He gave them a commission. He gave them tasks. He gave them, quote, talents, what have you, to go and to take care of the tasks. As they went, they would be rejected. Every constituent element that you find over here in Luke chapter 19 about Jesus' apostles going to Israel being rejected, which means the sovereignty and the kingship and the kingdom of Christ was being rejected. We will not have this man to rule over us, John chapter 19. So what would he do? He would come and destroy them. And in this manuscript that I was just looking at it again today, I've got this chart, comparative chart, imagine that, between Acts chapter 1, 6 through 11, and Luke chapter 19. And Luke chapter 19, this is once again another classic, glaring example of the inconsistency of the partial preterist such as Sam Frost. He doesn't even consider himself a partial preterist anymore, I go guess. He says he's an amillennialist, but amillennialists basically are partial preterists. But anyway, he says, see, time statements don't mean anything because in Luke 19, Jesus told a parable because they believed that the kingdom of heaven was to come immediately. Well, Sam Frost ever so subtly, definitely on purpose, and I know it's on purpose because Sam knows the Greek well enough to know exactly what's going on in Luke 19:11, The word immediately is from parakrema, or parakrema, if you please. It is not the word ingus. It is not the word taku. It is not intakai. It is parakrema. Parakrema means exactly what immediately means.
Right now.
Right now. And why did they think that? Well, because you have the story. As Jesus was traveling along, he was healing, he was teaching, etc., etc. And as he went on the way, here's a man up in a tree called Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. Remember that song? Sunday school and vacation Bible school. And Zacchaeus came to talk to Jesus and said, I believe. And Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down, because this day has salvation come to your house. Well, you see, salvation was the keynote word for the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so immediately the Pharisees began asking Jesus, when's the kingdom coming? When's the kingdom coming? And Jesus had to tell a parable to tell them the Son of Man must go away into a far country and to return, because they believe the kingdom is coming immediately.
Yeah. Hey guys, I've got to remind you about Psalm 110.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on there. And so here is Sam Frost, on the one hand, emphasizing parakrema and saying not immediately. At hand doesn't mean immediately. Well, that's sophistry. Immediately meant immediately.
No one is saying that at hand means immediately.
No
one. No Greek lexicon. No nothing.
No.
We're not. No.
But Sam Frost is accusing us of saying that.
Oh, so he's creating a straw man and just beating the crap out of it.
That's exactly right. He's creating a straw man. He's just beating the soup out of it, or beating the straw out of it, and saying, see, time statements don't mean one thing. These crazy preterists are misusing time statements. When it's him who is purposely ignoring the distinction between parakrema and ingus, taku, and intakai. He knows the difference.
Wow, that is really bad.
It's terrible. The very first time I heard him doing that, or read him doing that, I was just like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Surely he's not serious. That is subtle. But of course, he assures everyone that he knows the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's got his PhD, for crying out loud. Well, I don't care how many PhDs you've got after your name. As John Clayton, a man that I was friends with for several years, I think he passed away somewhat recently. He was once an atheist, became a very devout Christian, and what have you. And John Clayton had the equivalency in actual postgraduate work, accredited postgraduate work, amounting to the equivalency of 6 PhDs. 6
Wow.
PhDs.
He was a professional student.
He was. Well, I heard him say on one occasion, when an atheist asked him a pointed challenge, and he always loved to engage with atheists because he once was one. He knew their arguments. He knew what the objections were. And he said, this atheist asked him this question and made a claim. And so John Clayton said, I asked him, is that your field of expertise? And the guy says, no. And he says, well, do you have a PhD in any field? No, I don't. And John Clayton made the comment. He said, well, listen, I appreciate any man that's got a PhD. I appreciate the study, because here are my own academic achievements. But he said, when a man is talking outside of his field of expertise and has never actually done the research, then his PhD might as well stand for posthole digger. Now, that's a man who could speak out of vast scientific knowledge.
Right.
And that's what he was saying. Now, I actually applaud the fact that Sam Frost got his PhD. On the other hand of that, the fact that he's got a PhD, an accredited one, and again, I applaud that. I legitimately do. That doesn't guarantee that Sam Frost is handling the word of God accurately.
Yeah, he clearly he clearly has a bias in just every text you can go to. Well, real quick, because we're right at the 1 hour mark.
Yep.
Let's hit one more parable, the parable of the talents. I guess the bottom line here, guys, is that, like I have here, the term "after a long time" in the parable, he comes in the lifetime of those people. Like Gary DeMar says, he doesn't
Right.
come in the lifetime of their descendants, thousands or hundreds of years away. He comes in their lifetime. And then in the rest of the scripture, in John 5, a long time, this same phrase in the Greek is used of a lame man waiting for healing at this pool for 38 years.
38 years.
Which
is a long time.
In your lifetime, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So
well,
that's
and it's
context.
I'm really glad that you had this parable up there, and I knew that you probably would, because this is one of Kenneth Gentry's favorite passages of appeal, because as you well know, he acknowledges time statements. At hand means at hand, quickly, right, shortly, et cetera, et cetera. We got to honor those time statements. But then he comes to this parable of the talents, and he says, see, this master went away for a long time. It's been a long time. It's been 2,000 years. See, that's where a long time can be applied. And I think Gary DeMar's use of that you just cited there, what Kenneth Gentry is so conveniently ignoring, is that the long time was in the lifetime of that generation, or in the lifetime of the servants to whom he gave those parables. Pardon me, those talents.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that is grasping at straws.
Amen. Amen. So there is no contradiction between Jesus saying that his parousia and his erchomai is going to take place in this generation, a 40-year period, and then given a parable talking about a long time, because in that context, it's to a person's lifetime. So the two can go together perfectly.
And let's not forget that in the first century, the average lifespan of a male, Jewish male, was only slightly over 40 years. Now, certainly there are certainly exceptions to that,
right?
But they didn't live a long time. So when you consider that an average lifespan in the first century was 40 to 45 years, maybe 50 at most, when you consider that maybe 30, 35 years after Jesus, the expectation would have been, folks, it's been a long time.
Right. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we hit the Old Testament background and the passages that fulfill Acts 1, 9, and 11. So hopefully you can see between verse 9 and verse 11, we have a second Exodus generation, which we talked about, that 40 days turns into 40 years, kind of following that second Exodus motif. And then the Great Commission of verse 8, we showed you how it was fulfilled throughout the book of Acts. And we went to Romans 9:18, which is Romans 10:18, which is really our text, but we kind of took a little bit of a rabbit trail. But we know Acts 1:11 is something many people struggle with, and it is the future's go-to passage. So we wanted to spend some time on it, and we hope that it blessed you.
Amen.
All right, brother. We'll see you next week.
Good night.
All right. Good night.